listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the webinar hosted by the Investor Responsibility Research Center Institute and the Conference Board on a new research report, Driving Revenue Growth Through Sustainable Products and Services. Our agenda today is brief introductions, an in-depth review of the research, a few words on the IRRC Institute's perspective on the research, and then we'll take your questions. Just a few words on logistics for the webinar today. All of the attendees are in listen-only mode, but we do encourage your questions. Following the presentation or during the presentation, you can type your questions into the question box in your control panel. At the end of the presentation, we'll read the questions aloud and respond to those. Following this webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with a link to a replay of this webinar, as well as a link to these PowerPoint slides. This report and all others from the IRRC Institute are available at www.irrcinstitute.org. You can also download this report at the Conference Board website. We encourage you to share information about this report on social media. Our Twitter handle is @IRC Research and the Conference Board's is @Conference Board. If you have any audio or technical issues during the webinar, please contact GoToWebinar at 1-800-263-6317, and they'll be happy to help you. Our speakers today are Thomas Singer and John Lekumnick. Thomas Singer is the report author and is the author of this report and a principal researcher with the Conference Board. His research focuses on corporate social responsibility and sustainability issues. Prior to joining the Conference Board, Thomas worked with Blue Sky Sustainability Consulting and Sustainability, where he helped clients embed sustainability into their core business. John Lekumnick has served as Executive Director of the IRRC Institute since 2008. Along with the board, he's positioned the Institute as a leading source of objective academic and practitioner research on a broad array of investment issues. The research is targeted at aiming investors, policymakers, and other stakeholders to make data-driven decisions. John's regarded as a leading thinker on investment issues, and he also is a managing partner at an investment management consultancy. Early in his career, John served as an investment advisor to the New York City pension funds. Just a couple words about the IRC Institute if you're not familiar with the organization. It's a nonprofit. It was established in 2005. Essentially what the Institute does is it funds and disseminates a broad range of research at the intersection of corporate responsibility and the informational needs of investors. We sponsor an annual Investor Research Award that's coming up in September, so we encourage you to check that out. There's a 5-year impact report available on the website that'll give you a glimpse at what the organization has done over time. All of the research is available at no charge and on the website. Just to give you a sense of some of the broad range of research topics, the latest report conducted was on the material of human capital and to corporate financial performance. The Institute's also implemented or delivered research reports on everything from high-frequency trading to cybersecurity to executive compensation to hydraulic fracking. So feel free to take a look at all of those research reports on the website. And with that, I will turn the presentation over to Thomas. Thomas?
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you to all for joining us today in this discussion about the key findings from our recent report. Over the past few months, it's been a pleasure to work with the IRRC Institute in a collaboration that really examines the extent to which sustainability initiatives, corporate sustainability initiatives, are generating revenue, providing business growth opportunities, and stimulating innovation in products and services among some of the largest multinational companies. What has driven this research? And really, it's the foundation or the recognition that sustainability programs are more than just drivers of cost efficiency or cost reductions. It's this transition to seeing sustainability as potential drivers of innovation and really elements of a company's growth strategy. So the conversation is moving away from just how can sustainability help companies and organizations do less bad, but also about understanding how sustainability can contribute to top-line growth and innovation. So that was really the foundation for why we embarked on this research project. Some of the key questions addressed in the research include how much revenue are companies generating from portfolios of sustainable products and services, and how much R&D spending are companies allocating to sustainability. We were also interested in understanding the change over time. So over the last 4 years, how has revenue from these portfolios changed, and how have R&D investments on sustainability changed? And on a qualitative side, we're also interested in understanding what lessons could be learned from companies that have successfully launched these portfolios. What are some of the challenges associated with launching these portfolios, and what are some of the lessons as far as what works and what doesn't work. Now, when we first started, or when we embarked on this research, we realized very quickly that definitions were going to be crucial to understanding this research. The term sustainable product is really quite riddled with definitional issues, and one could even say or argue that sustainable products don't exist. All products have some environmental impact. And for this reason, many companies actually prefer to use terms such as environmentally preferable products, or sustainability advantaged, or environmentally superior to existing alternatives. And really, this research uses the term sustainable products and services primarily as shorthand to refer to products or services that have an explicit environmental advantage over equivalent existing products or services. So when you hear me say sustainable product or sustainable service, we're really referring to these products or services that have an explicit environmental advantage over existing equivalents. Now, a quick word on the methodology to give you a sense of how the research was structured. We started with the S&P Global 100 as our research universe. So we looked strictly at the S&P Global 100. We recognize that there are companies outside of this index that are doing work in this space, but the research, for practical reasons, was bound by the S&P Global 100 index. We obtained, organized, and analyzed publicly disclosed company data on revenues and R&D spending associated with sustainable products and services. So we collected data for the most recent year available, which in most cases meant 2013 data. And in a few cases, we were able to find 2014 data, but for the purposes of the average calculations throughout the report, 2013 data were used. And we looked at data back to 2010 when available. Now, we actually wanted to make this an exercise not so much in disclosure of data. We wanted to get a sense of all data that were available on this subject. So we reached out to the 100 companies in an effort to collect any data on revenues related to sustainable products and services and R&D spending associated with sustainability that may exist, regardless of whether it was included in a sustainability report or an annual report or any other company publication. In some cases, companies do track these data, but may not publish it in a sustainability report or annual report. And in those cases, we worked with companies to see if they might be willing to share the data with us. So in addition to the quantitative piece of the report, we developed case studies, about 12 case studies, to feature company-specific initiatives related to sustainable products and services and those portfolios, to get a sense of how those portfolios were launched, how the portfolios are governed, any successes or challenges associated with the portfolios, and to feature some specific examples of sustainable products or services offered by these companies. So that's a quick overview of the methodology. I'd also like to present you with a short word of caution, if you wish, or a disclaimer, that really the data that this research is based upon remain very limited and largely unstandardized. Very few companies have developed reporting around a standalone group of sustainable products or services, and even fewer track revenues or R&D spending associated with these portfolios. So the sample size is small, but having said that, these are large multinational companies, so we believe the findings are still significant and provide us a very good sense of the state of play. So at the end of the day, the research should really be viewed as an attempt to quantify the contribution of sustainable products and services to company growth. It's not a perfect science, but it does give us an understanding or a sense to the extent to which sustainability is driving growth and innovation among some of these companies. So as I said, we profiled 12 companies in the report. These companies are spread in 6 different sectors, everything from insurance to industrials to technology, household products, uh, chemicals, etc. So a good variety of sectors and industries are represented. And of course, each of these companies have their own specific initiatives, and they differ from sector to sector and even within company to company. So I encourage you to take a look at the various case studies. Now, briefly, what we found, and I'll go into each of these key findings, if you wish, in more detail in the next few slides, but to give you a sense of the overall findings from the report. One, we found that the portfolios of sustainable products and services are contributing significantly to revenue for many of these companies and are growing at an accelerated pace, in particular compared to overall company revenues. And growth of these portfolios in many instances can be attributed to the incorporation of sustainable products into company strategic planning and target setting. So setting those enterprise-wide goals, those 2015 goals, and now those 2020 goals are really helping companies think strategically about the role of sustainable products and services as drivers of growth and revenue. R&D spending allocated to these products and services is also supporting the growth of these portfolios, and I'll get into a little bit about what kind of areas companies are investing in. We also thought about the role of the financial sector in this space, and it's very evident that commercial banks, investment banks play a significant role in developing or encouraging the development of sustainable products and services, and their involvement in this space is mushrooming. On a qualitative perspective, when we ask companies what advice they would give to other organizations thinking about launching these types of portfolios, a very common piece of advice was to widely engage stakeholders in the development of these portfolios. This includes everything from ensuring the CEO is highly engaged, the C-suite is highly engaged, everything from ensuring they're able to tap into passionate employees and understanding customers as well. And we'll get into those details in just a little bit. So let's look at this very first point about the role of sustainable products and services as contributors to revenue and how they're growing over the last few years. What we found is that among our sample, and the sample is fairly small, it's 12 companies for 2013. Among the sample, sustainable products and services on average accounted for 21% of total revenues. And you can see over the last few years how that has changed. And what's interesting here is actually that the sample sizes have changed. In 2010, the number of companies that were reporting this type of data that we were able to obtain this type of data for was 7. So 7 companies in 2010 and now 12 companies in 2013. So the number of companies that are thinking about the role that sustainability plays in revenue and top line growth has been increasing. Now, if we look at this slide, we get a sense of how these portfolios are contributing to total revenues by company. Now, what I'd like you to take away from this slide is not so much comparing, the percentage of revenue from sustainable products from BASF versus Panasonic versus Philips or GE, but rather to get an overall sense of the extent of the role that these portfolios play across company revenues. So for some companies, if you look at the industrial companies, for example, GE, Philips, Siemens, Toshiba, these portfolios of sustainable products and services contribute a significant amount to revenues. In the case of Philips, 50%, and in fact, the 2014 data shows it's over half of revenues coming from their portfolio of sustainable products and services. Now, what we also see is a significant opportunity for growth in some of these companies and the role that sustainable products and services play. When we look at the growth of revenues from portfolios of sustainable products and services, we saw that these portfolios are growing at 6 times the rate of overall company revenues. So if we compare the revenues from 2013 versus 2010, these portfolios of sustainable products and services grew by 91% on average in our sample. This compared to 15% growth in overall company revenues for those same companies. So significant growth between these years. So when we stop to think about what is contributing to the growth of these portfolios, and I mentioned the important role that strategic planning and target setting plays in growing these portfolios. What I'll do now is I'll walk you through some of the examples from our report to give you a sense of the types of goals that companies have put in place and the progress against those goals. So let's start looking at GE as an example. So GE, General Electric, set a goal in 2005 to increase revenues from its Eco-Imagination initiative to at least $20 billion by 2010. And more importantly, the goal also included growing the revenues from Eco-Imagination at 2 times the rate of overall industrial revenues for the company. Now I'll talk about the progress in a second, but just to give you an example of one of the products or services within the Eco-Imagination portfolio, what you're seeing here is an example of the GE Light Grid system, which allows remote monitoring, control, metering, as well as GPS mapping of streetlights. This is just one of several examples from the Eco-Imagination initiative. Again, so the goal was 20 billion by 2010 and to grow by 2 times the rate of overall industrial revenues. What actually has happened is in 2014, Eco-Imagination revenues now totaled 34 billion and represented about 31% of GE's overall industrial revenues. So the initial goal was to grow at 2 times the rate of overall industrial revenue. What GE actually accomplished was a growth of 4 times the rate of the company's overall industrial revenue. So you see some fairly gradual but very positive growth since 2010 all the way to 2014 data. If we look at another example, this one from Dow Chemical, Dow in 2006 set a 2015 target to derive 10% of the company's revenues from products that are highly advantaged by sustainable chemistry. And one such example of this type of product is what you see here, which is a water purification membrane. This particular product delivers 40% better water purification with 30% less energy usage. And it's just one of the several examples within this portfolio of products that are highly advantaged by sustainable chemistry. So the goal was 10% of revenues from these products or services by 2015. What has actually happened is this goal was achieved early in 2013, 10% of revenues coming from these types of products, and that totaled almost $6 billion. Again, you see a consistent growth in the share of total revenues that are coming from these types of products or services, from just over 4% in 2010 to 10% of company revenues in 2013. Another example from the chemical sector comes from DuPont. And DuPont set a goal in 2011 to increase its annual revenue from products that either increase energy efficiency or significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions by at least $2 billion by 2015. And what you see here is just one example of what we mean by these types of products or services. And in this case, it's cellulosic ethanol, which comes from DuPont's biofuel solutions. This is essentially a fuel derived from non-food feed, such as corn stover. For many years, one of the criticisms around ethanol production is that it competes with food sources, but cellulosic ethanol is actually based from corn stover and other non-food sources. It's the waste part of corn, essentially. So just one example of what we mean by one of the products or services in DuPont's portfolio. So the goal was actually achieved early as well. By 2013, the products in this portfolio accounted for $2.5 billion in revenues and represented 7% of DuPont's overall revenues. Again, you see some gradual growth in revenue from this portfolio all the way back from 2010 to 2013. If we look at another example, this is from a more consumer-facing example from Johnson & Johnson, which set a goal in 2011 to reach 60 Earthworks products by 2015. Earthworks is the company's portfolio of sustainable products. And the example that we see here is just a few of the different products in this portfolio, just to give you a sense of what one of them looks like. If we just go back one slide, you'll see that Neutrogena Naturals towelettes is one of the examples, with 90% of the ingredients in this product derived from natural sources. So again, the goal was 60 products in this portfolio by 2011, and what actually was accomplished was that by 2014, there were 73 Earthworks products in the in J&J's portfolio. These products accounted for about 8 billion in revenues, or 11% of total revenues. Some significant growth since 2010 in the number of products in the portfolio. As you can see, some of the goals tend to be revenue-based goals, others tend to be actual product number goals in the portfolio. And then our last example here, one you might be familiar with, comes from Kimberly-Clark, which set a goal in 2011 to achieve a quarter of revenues from environmentally innovative products by 2015. The example you see here, you might be familiar with this tube-free Scott Naturals. You might have seen some of the marketing materials around the tube-free bathroom tissue, but what you see here is essentially that about of the wasted cardboard tubes that are thrown away each year, that's enough to fill about 2 Empire State Buildings. So the idea was, how can we come up with a way to reduce some of that waste stream? Just to give you one example of a type of product that falls under Kimberly-Clark's portfolio. So the goal was 25% of revenue from these products, and what was achieved was actually 37% of revenue from products in the ecological portfolio in 2013. These products totaled about 8 billion in revenue for the company. Some significant growth again compared to 2010, when products in this portfolio only accounted for about 10% of revenues. So if we transition now to R&D spending, and we think about the role that R&D spending plays in driving some of these portfolios and innovation within companies, we saw that there are several instances of companies that are specifically allocating R&D spending towards sustainable products and services, or sustainability generally. Now, the reality is that in most cases, companies do not actually separate R&D spending allocated to sustainability from overall R&D spending. They do that, they choose not to, simply because they see it as an integrated process, and that certainly makes sense. But there were a few instances that we found where companies were specifically separating R&D spending allocated to sustainability from overall R&D spending. And what we found was that in these instances, the amount allocated to sustainability R&D spending was significant. In 2013, on average, the sample of companies allocated about 38% of their R&D budget to sustainability, broadly speaking. That's a little over $1.5 billion on average. If we look at how that has changed over the last few years, we see that it's been fairly consistent since 2011, but some growth from 2010, where it was about 33% of a budget was on average allocated to sustainability. If we look at how that has changed in dollar sense, we see that the growth compared to 2010 has been significant, nowhere near the 6 times growth from revenues, but certainly outpacing overall change in R&D spending. So we looked at the change in sustainability R&D spending versus change in total R&D spending. We found that compared to 2010, sustainability R&D spending increased by 21% on average in our sample. Overall R&D spending increased by 15%. So again, significant growth, and certainly outpacing it. Now let's take a moment to think about or discuss what some of the products and technologies that companies are investing in. When we looked throughout the various examples of the company profiles in the report, we tried to understand, okay, so what types of technologies and services are companies looking to invest in and looking to develop going forward. And what I'll do here is go over some examples, certainly not a comprehensive list, but to give you a taste of what companies are putting their R&D dollars and budgets towards. So electric mobility technology is certainly a big hotspot. Some of the focus here, of course, around alternative fuel technologies, but also improving electric batteries and making sure that they're more efficient or more affordable. Intelligent transport systems, by that I mean automated cars, automated driving cars, or congestion management technologies. Structural adhesives. These include adhesives that are designed to lightweight vehicles and improve their fuel efficiency. And a few other examples on the next slide. Functional crop care, so fertilizers that are designed to help crops withstand some weather changes, to help with drought conditions or temperature changes, as well as erosion. Or reverse osmosis technologies to tackle some water supply issues, as well as industrial biotechnology. I spoke a little bit about some of the biofuels, but there's also work being done on developing non-petroleum based plastics. A few other examples on the next slide include renewable energy technologies. The typical ones we always talk about: solar technologies, improving solar, and developing wind technologies, and a few others as well. But not so much, not just the technologies themselves, but the materials that go into those technologies. So, for example, advanced materials for PV cells that help these cells withstand aggressive weather conditions, or that help make them more efficient, as well as increasing existing power plant efficiencies. And a few other examples include continuing to improve product energy efficiency, and by that I mean not just at the product manufacturing stage, but also at the product use stage. Energy management technologies, this is everything from smart meters, smart grids, smart building technologies. And then lastly, materials reduction and innovation. This could include everything from finding alternative materials for products, reducing the number of materials used, as well as eliminating toxic materials. So this is it gives you an overview of some of the areas that companies are investing in. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we also looked at the role that the financial sector and that banks and investment banks play in stimulating innovation around sustainable products and services. And what became very clear was that banks are playing an increasingly significant role in financing the development of these products and solutions, primarily through asset finance, tax equity, and green bonds. If we look at investments in renewable energy technologies, this is data from Bloomberg New Energy Finance, we see that there's been significant growth, over 5 times growth compared to 2004 in the amount invested in renewable energy technologies. 310 billion was allocated to these types of technologies in 2014. That's only the second highest amount since 2011. So significant growth over the last few years in this space. But then we also identified green bonds as another important component of the total fixed income market. Now, it's a small component, but the growth in this space is fairly significant. Just as a quick reminder and refresher to everyone on the call, green bonds are fixed income financial instruments in which the funds raised are dedicated exclusively to projects that have sustainability benefits. This can include anything from developing wind farms to water purification plants, etc. So green bonds are a small component, but what we found is that they're actually growing significantly. In 2014, almost 39 billion in green bonds were issued, and that's about 2.5 times the amount issued in the previous year in 2013. What's interesting here is where the growth is coming from, and historically the largest contributor to, or the largest amount of green bonds were issued by supranational institutions, the World Bank, for example. But we're seeing significant growth in corporate issued green bonds. So again, an interesting space to continue to look at as far as how financial institutions are getting involved in driving growth in sustainable products and services. Now, just to get a sense of some of the qualitative findings from the research, when we asked companies to share some of their insights as to what works, what kind of advice they would give to other organizations looking to develop these types of portfolios, we got a fairly common answer, which was to widely engage stakeholders in development of these initiatives. And why this recommendation? And the reason being that there's a number of challenges that companies really have to overcome in order to launch these portfolios of sustainable products and services. Primarily the lack of existing global standards in this field. This is a very nascent field, and it really isn't a recognized global standard. Then there's also the trade-offs between cost, environmental design, and the pressure to price these types of products competitively. And lastly, but certainly not least, embedding these initiatives into existing company processes. So these were some of the top 3 challenges that companies shared with us as far as what's getting in the way of developing some of these portfolios and what's hindering some of their success. But we also asked for suggestions on insights as to how to overcome those challenges. And like I said, this idea of embedding or engaging stakeholders widely came to the top, and these various points here kind of point to that message of engaging stakeholders widely. Primarily leadership from the CEO and C-suite, tremendously important for ensuring the success of these portfolios. Then tapping into motivated and passionate employees, really using the resources, the internal resources from employees that are passionate about these initiatives and can generate ideas to encourage innovation around these types of products and services. And then understanding the specific needs of customers and society, aligning the needs of customers and society with some of the core competencies of the company. And then lastly, but perhaps in many cases, very importantly, this idea of clearly communicating the business benefits of the company's sustainable products and services. So in many cases, companies are communicating the sustainability benefits of the products and services in these portfolios. But what is missing from that equation is communicating the business benefits of those products and services. Now, what I'd like to do is leave you here with this idea that the research should really be viewed as an invitation to advance the analysis of corporate sustainability initiatives as drivers of business growth. For a long time, and in most instances, sustainability continues to be seen as a bit tangential to the core business. And what we found in the research is that in many cases, this is absolutely not true. In fact, it can be a significant driver of growth, innovation, and certainly of revenue for many of the companies that we profiled. So John, I'll pass it to you for some thoughts as well on IRCI involvement in the research and your viewpoint.
Thank you very much, Tom. Thomas gave, I think, a very fulsome and robust discussion, so I'm going to be brief so that we can get to your questions. You stole my word, which was nascent. It is a nascent area of research. There's a lack of standardization, as Thomas said. I will tell you that when I proposed this study to my board of directors, those of you who are familiar with IRRC Institute research know we like lots of objective data and benchmarking. What I told my board was that this would be by far the worst data set that we ever looked at, but it will also be by far the best data in the field. And I think that is what we delivered. That said, on any basis that you want to look at it, from the data available to anecdotal to just a series of data points, the data is very consistent with what else does exist in the field. It's consistent with previous research, and I would just specifically mention the value driver model, which was a UN PRI and UN Compact report that of 2013. That was geared more towards suggesting ways that companies might report on this, but they did look at various corporate sustainability portfolios and found very similar results. Poor data doesn't mean poor results in this field, however. As Thomas said, this is moving for large, sophisticated companies from a compliance function. I think the way Thomas said it was not just doing less bad, to a strategic imperative to drive revenues and, most important, profitable revenues. You already heard the statistic that the revenue growth was 6 times the rate of growth overall. That seems, for a large, mature company that is somewhat bounded by the law of large numbers, to be a remarkable achievement. The other point that I want to make is, as I said, the revenue growth is economically profitable revenue growth. Again, the data points are not robust. The number of companies that report on R&D is limited. And there's obviously a time lag between when R&D is done and when it is commercialized. But when you compare those two numbers side by side, you'll see that revenue growth as a percentage of overall growth and R&D spending as a percentage move in two very different directions. R&D is much slower growing, revenue growth is much faster growing, which would seem to imply profitable growth. The second data point I would give you is we had a meeting with a number of these companies, and Toshiba basically just came out and said, yes, the margins on our sustainable products are much higher than the margins on the rest of our products. So this appears to be profitable growth, and it appears to be scalable, at least in the near and intermediate future, because while $8 billion or $39 billion or any of these numbers are large numbers, given the size of these companies, it would appear that they can penetrate much more of their markets. And as Thomas said, this is largely being driven by customer demand. So it would appear that this is scalable growth, profitable growth, and rapid growth. That is clearly what both companies and investors seek. There are a couple of other benefits to this that seemed interesting. When you read through the individual corporate profiles, what you will see is that the sustainable products drive innovation across traditional product silos. If you think about it, that is intuitive. You're going to have engineers talking about material reduction. You're going to have marketing people. You're going to have transportation and logistics. And often those breakthrough technologies and even the more minor innovations are shared within a company. So they clearly have that benefit of driving innovation across silo. The other thing that Thomas alluded to that I'd like to draw out is they seem to energize employees, is what we heard over and over. Employees are glad to be doing this. They're proud to be doing it. It drives motivation and employee involvement. So what you really see here is that sustainability is not a compliance function. It's not a do less bad function. It has become a different lens for boards and C-suites to look at strategic planning and to drive improvements in product and service throughout a company. And with that, I will turn it over to Kelly to take audience questions.
Terrific. Thanks, Thomas and John. Now we are on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. As a reminder, you have a control panel on your screen there. There's a question box. If you want to just open that box up, if you have a question, just type in your question and I will read it aloud, and either Thomas or John or both will respond to your questions. So I'm going to pull open the question panel in my screen and see what questions we've got. Looks like we've got a couple in the queue already. The first one we have: are companies submitting their sustainability portfolios for external assurances like audits?
Yeah, that's a great point. So as I mentioned earlier, this space is highly unstandardized. So there's a bit of a patchwork as to how companies are going about this. But in our review of the various company profiles in the report, we found several instances where companies are in fact having some of these portfolios assured externally. And in fact, it's really a two-step process. There's assurance that takes place on the methodology versus verification and assurance on the methodology as to how or what makes a product eligible to be included in a sustainable product portfolio, if you wish. So there's an element of assurance in that step, and then in some cases there's an element of assurance and verification in the reporting of the data, the revenues themselves. And in most cases, that assurance is done by organizations that also assure a company's sustainability report. So if the revenue data from these types of products are included in a sustainability report, and that company is using the services of an external assurer for that report, that data is also usually undergoes the same assurance process. And we saw that in a number of different cases throughout the companies that we looked at.
Thanks.
Thomas, a question. Those that are not using external assurance, are any of them using like internal audit?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So in a few cases, companies are using their own internal auditing process to make sure that the numbers that they're reporting are verified and assured, at least internally.
Thank you. Our next question, I can take that one. Will you provide a copy of this presentation in an email to attendees? The answer is yes. We will send everyone on this call and everyone who registered an email by tomorrow with the download to the replay, as well as where you can download a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation. Our next question, why do so few companies disclose metrics related to innovation and sustainability products and solutions innovation and related revenue or R&D?
Yeah, there's a few reasons for this. In order to be able to disclose metrics related to sustainable products or services and the revenue associated with those products or R&D spending associated with those products, a company has to have a sustainability initiative in the first place. So that's the first hurdle. Does a company have a sustainability initiative? Beyond that, then it becomes a question of resources. Are the resources in place to be able to track revenues from these types of products and then do the reporting around them? So that's one issue. Another issue is that a company may not actually have in place a methodology or a system to identify a portfolio of sustainable products and services. And that in itself is a fairly resource-intensive process to come up with a methodology that is externally verified or at least recognized to identify what products within a company's portfolio can be included in this type of sustainable product portfolio, and then be able to report metrics around the revenue. So it really comes down to an issue of resources and also where along the path of sustainability maturity, if you wish, a company is in. So if there's no overall sustainability initiative within a company, then these things can't happen. And even if there is a sustainability initiative, there's a whole next challenge of coming up with a process for creating a portfolio of these types of products and then reporting on those products. So it really comes down to kind of those two primary issues. There are a few other challenges along the way as well, which are related to the challenges I talked about earlier, including the standardization of the whole system, and then also there are a few instances where companies are just simply not comfortable at this point in time in labeling products as sustainable or sustainably advantaged even. The greenwashing is certainly a concern among some companies.
The next question is sort of related. What would it take to get better disclosure related to innovation and sustainable products innovation? It seems that less than 10% of companies have any type of disclosure today.
Again, I think it comes down to this issue of standardization. If we can come up with a standard way of identifying a process for defining what products can be considered as sustainable products or services, and then a process for tracking and reporting the metrics around those products, the revenues from those products and the R&D investments in those products, that can drive disclosure. I think the lack of standards is certainly one of the biggest hurdles to improving disclosure in this space.
Okay, the next question, what was the margin of error on the revenue numbers?
The margin of error on the revenue numbers. So these are these are as reported by the companies. I'm not sure I understand beyond that what the question is getting at, but these are as disclosed by companies in either their annual reports or sustainability reports or through communications with them.
Okay, the next question, how is the difference so large between sustainable products revenue growth versus overall revenue growth when the revenue growth of sustainable products was up only 3% over those years?
So we're looking at two different figures here. I believe the chart that we're looking at is, one of the charts we're looking at is referring to the share from revenues from sustainable products and services out of overall revenues from the company. And there's the separate charts that looks at the actual revenues from those products and services compared to overall revenues for the company and the growth in those revenues. So one is looking at revenue growth, and the other chart is looking at the share of revenue out of overall revenue over the last few years.
Did I pull up the right chart for you there?
And I would just add that in effect you're starting from a smaller base on the sustainability number, but it's not so small as to be infinitesimal when you're talking about roughly 20% of revenues of multi-billion dollar, multi-tens of billions of dollar revenue companies. It's not like you're going from zero and just have a not meaningful statistical increase. The 91% increase is still starting from mid-billions of dollars. But it will take the fact that it has had an impact on percentage of overall revenues is in my mind indicative of the fact that these have reached some scale that they impact corporate overall corporate revenues and corporate profitability.
Right. And Kelly, if you go back one slide, two slides actually. The percentages here are the share of overall revenue. They're not, and when we looked at the original chart, which is the 91%, that's an increase in revenue figures, not the share out of total revenue. I hope that helps explain.
Terrific. The next question, do you see continued declines in energy prices as a reason for companies not to pursue sustainable strategies and products?
That's a question that really is beyond the scope of the research, the specific research. But it's a complicated question. I think it really depends on the specifics of the company, the industry they're in, and what types of products and services they're investing in. I mean, in many cases, these R&D investments are planned far enough in advance that those changes in energy prices don't really alter the sustainability strategy that a company has put in place. But again, it's really beyond the scope of what we were looking at specifically. I mean, John, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, it is beyond the scope. You're correct on the long lead time on R&D. I would also point out that some of these things are unrelated to energy, such as water. But there's sort of what's your time period on energy? Do you believe in stranded asset theory? It is a planning, a complex planning process for many of these companies. And the other thing I would say is that since it is moved from not just a cost avoidance to a revenue driver, in some ways it will depend on the demand of the customers and whether or not a reduced cost of energy affects what customers are demanding, as opposed to just a cost avoidance strategy for the companies that are manufacturing.
Right.
Thank you. Our next question, have you assessed or do you plan to assess how these or other companies perform in the marketplace, that is financial or stock market performance, relative to their industry peers who have not adopted such sustainable practices in product portfolios?
Yes, that's a great insight and a very interesting suggestion. That specific assessment was not part of this research, but I think it does, play very well as an addition to the research, or something we could look at in the future, understanding the performance, the financial performance, the stock market performance, or other measures of performance that we want to look at of the companies that are, successfully driving growth of some of these portfolios versus, peers that maybe are not. I think that does lend itself well to future research, and there are a number of ways we can take this research and kind of cut it and analyze it in future projects as well. I think it does make sense.
Our next question, any thoughts on standardizing that definition of sustainability products?
Yes, there's some work that is underway. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development has been working on a few pilots to try and standardize that definition, or come up with sector-based methodologies for defining, what a sustainable product might look like, and for help in assistance creating these types of portfolios. So there is some work being done to try to get to a more standard definition. But at this point, it's still, as John and I had said, a very nascent space, and there is no universally recognized standard at this point, although some work is being done.
Our next question, how many of these companies have internal financial incentives for staff to develop sustainable products?
That is a great question. I don't have specific figures as to how many of them have incentives for developing these products. I do know that a number of companies are beginning to link, executive compensation to sustainability performance. That's, again, another one of these very nascent areas. The number of companies doing so still remains pretty low, but more and more are beginning to think about ways to link compensation to sustainability performance. Specifically to developing sustainable products and services, just anecdotally, I know that in some of the conversations we've had with companies, there are some incentives in place. Johnson & Johnson, I believe, in our last conversation, brought up the idea that there's quite a bit of recognition that takes place within the company to recognize individuals who've been contributing to developing these types of products, or who come up with ideas for sustainable products or services. So there's recognition. I couldn't tell you specifically if it's monetary recognition or not. I can't remember the specifics, but there's certainly a high level of recognition, be it awards or prizes or otherwise.
Right, and just to, again, nascent seems to be the word of the day here, but drawing the dotted line between different facts. A year ago, the IRRC Institute did a report about S&P 500 board oversight of sustainability issues. And what we found at the time was that 55.4% of the S&P 500 had some sustainability issue at the board level assigned to a board committee. So this has clearly reached the point. Boards are constrained in terms of time and bandwidth, and the fact that they have made it part of board charters suggests that they see this as a differentiator. The next step for most companies is, if you have this at a board level, you're trying to drive HR policies through the company to achieve what the board wants to do. So again, we do not have numbers. I think you can look at the J&J example and some of the others in terms of the sort of shop floor engineering recognition, and you can look at that previous study in terms of the import that boards give it, and suggest that that draws a very incomplete picture, but a picture that is at least consistent with having companies try to drive this through the entire workforce.
Thank you. Our next question, is there any data regarding the price point of the sustainable preferred products versus the standard competitive products in the marketplace?
Yeah, so I would say we don't have figures necessarily on it, but we do have some qualitative kind of points around this topic, and I think it comes down to one of the challenges that I discussed earlier, which is really ensuring that, or battling, with this idea of making sure that the products within these portfolios are cost competitive with existing products or alternative products. And that's one of the issues that I think companies are continuing to struggle with, is making sure that these environmentally preferable or sustainable products are able to compete with the alternatives from a cost standpoint or a price standpoint. That's always a challenge. I think most of these products, or many of these products, do tend to be priced to a certain degree a little bit higher than others, as I think John alluded to earlier. The margins of these products are higher.
Our next question: which sustainable sectors are driving the most revenue growth?
Which sustainable sectors? Do we mean industries and sectors?
Probably.
If we mean just generally industries and sectors, when we look at the chart that shows the various companies, the 12 companies across the various sectors, what we see is that on average, it's the companies within the industrial sector that are showing the highest revenue share from sustainable products and services. Now, I wouldn't go as too far with that comparison of sector by sector, simply because the sample size is small. 12 companies, there's about 4 or 5 of them in the industrial sector, and there's maybe only 3 in the chemical sector. So we can't really make serious sector level conclusions. But overall, if we look at the companies in that sample and recognize that there are some limitations with the sample, it's companies in that industrial sector are generating the highest share of total revenues from portfolios of sustainable products and services. That really makes sense when you think about the types of products and services that they're offering. They're mostly B2B companies, and that customer demand for products that that have sustainability advantages or can help companies reduce their own environmental impact. Most of those products and services are coming from those types of companies. We also saw a fairly high share of revenue from these types of products and services from the chemical companies, about 10% roughly on average across the 3 or 4 chemical companies that we looked at. So I would highlight those two as some as examples of sectors that are generating a significant amount of revenue from these portfolios. But again, with that caveat that the sample size really limits significant conclusions on a sector by sector level.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. I know we're getting up against the 3 o'clock hour, but we'll just keep plowing through the questions. So thanks everyone for all these wonderful questions. Our next question: how are companies gauging their shareholders' interest in sustainability initiatives and product innovation? Are investors able to analyze companies' innovations without standardization in the industry for metrics? Are investors asking about this?
That's a great question. Maybe, John, if you want to tackle that one, I can offer some thoughts as well, but with your experience at the IRRC Institute.
It's actually a wonderful and very difficult question, because the mechanisms companies have for engaging with investors often revolve around a quarterly conference call. The people on the quarterly conference call tend to be analysts who are looking for next quarter's numbers, things which will move a stock price in the near term. The sustainability investors tend to be much more long-term and less likely to be on the quarterly conference call. So a traditional complaint that one hears from CFOs and CEOs when you speak to them about these issues is no one ever raises this in the quarterly calls. I will say that, having said that, one of the fastest growing areas of investment capital in the United States is SRI funds. That some of the larger, what I would call permanent and universal investors, so this would be either very large liability-driven investors like CalSTRS, New York State, Florida, the public pension funds, and also the very large index investors like BlackRock, have made this a point in their one-on-one engagements with large corporations, and have called for more investment in these areas. So, like much in this field, unfortunately, those are anecdotal, but that is what I am hearing from both the investor side and the corporate side, that it is not raised much on quarterly conference calls, but that it is raised in direct engagement with larger, more universal owners.
Yeah, and I would add that, from our research on the proxy voting season, we found that the activity within sustainability-related proposals, environmental as well as social, has seen significant growth over the last few years. It's one of the highest areas of engagement in terms of shareholder proposals. Now, of course, the results are fairly low. Not too many of these proposals tend to pass, but there's certainly a significant amount of activity in this space.
Thank you for mentioning that. We also did do a report on that a couple of years ago, and I don't have it in front of me, but what I remember is not only is it fast growing, but there are an increasing number of votes on these areas, many of which call for disclosure, that tend to be in the 30 and 40% range, which is far up from last year. If people want to go to the IRC website and just scroll through the past news, you can get the statistics on those. But again, that's much more of an engagement, the proxy voting and engagement side, and less in the sell side research. Although, to be fair, it is increasingly appearing in sell side research. You are seeing some of these products, like GE's Echo Imagination, smart grid technology, being referenced in the sell side research reports. So it is starting. But I would say in this case, the companies are far ahead of the investors in terms of understanding how this can drive future profitability.
Okay, next question, and just for your information, John and Thomas, we have several more questions, so I'll just keep going through them. Again, thank you all for these great questions. What would some of the metrics that need to be standardized? What would be some of the metrics that need to be standardized?
Well, I would say the process itself for determining what constitutes a sustainable product or service for any given sector or industry, and then at the company level, there's some standardization that needs to happen there. The definition of what constitutes a sustainable product and what are the qualifications for it, and then the actual reporting of those metrics, whether it be revenue metrics or other metrics associated with those products or services. We talk about profitability as well, so there's some standardization that needs to be done in that space. So again, the process, and then the actual reporting of those metrics, and what metrics actually need to be reported and where.
A related question, what organizations is or are likely to create standards for the metrics? Is anyone in the industry working on this?
Yes, I touched on this briefly earlier. The World Business Council on Sustainable Development is doing some work on a sector-by-sector basis to try to come up with some standard metrics in this space. That's one example.
And that report that I cited earlier, the 2013 report from PRI and the Global Compact, suggests metrics, not standardization of the definitions, but metrics that can be reported by companies that would be of interest to investors.
Our next question, per the assertion that sustainable investments are largely demand-driven, do number studies or surveys exist to corroborate demand for sustainability?
there are a number of studies out there that look at demand for sustainability. We didn't specifically look at overall demand for sustainability in this research, but there are a number of reports that point to that. And generally speaking, the demand is increasing. I mean, I think the consumer demand is a little bit fickle and hard to track. We're seeing some evidence of consumers willing to pay more for sustainable products and services. Some research surveys have shown that. But then the customer demand is actually a little bit more clear. And there's a few different surveys in different industries that have been conducted. In the chemical sector, for example, has found significant growth in consumer or customer interest in green chemistry. So there are a few different reports that look at overall demand and then sector by sector demand. And we reference a few of them in the report.
Next question, how is the sustainability of products and or services aligned with good governance? That is, what should be the roles of boards and management?
Yes, that's a great point. Many of these companies are what I would call fairly mature in the journey of sustainability. So they have mature sustainability strategies. Many of them have board committees that specifically on sustainability. They have targets and goals set up to advance their sustainability initiatives. So it's certainly a strong role that good governance plays in driving some of these initiatives. I think you couldn't successfully make the case for these initiatives or launch these initiatives and grow them without the right governance systems in place. And I would encourage everyone to look at the case studies, the company profiles, to look at examples of how these initiatives are governed at some of the companies.
Okay, just
again, we did do a report that looks at this. About a third of companies that have sustainability metrics at the board level put them in the corporate governance, nominating corporate governance committee. About a third in either sustainability or public affairs. That's often in, for instance, the pharmaceutical or a heavily regulated industry, and a third elsewhere. The other comment that I would make about that is, as sustainability becomes viewed less as a compliance issue and more as part of the strategy of the company, the board role actually becomes clearer, because the board is no longer doing ad hoc, are you compliant type of oversight checks, and it's much more integrated into the standard strategy planning that boards do, usually on a once-a-year off-site conference and then with markers through the year. So the role of sustainability gets more integrated into the strategic planning of the company.
Next question, have you seen the 2015 brands, BRANDZ data on the relationship between brand purpose and brand equity and brand value financially?
I don't recall that specific report, but we've looked at previous reports on brand, the link between brand, sustainability, and reputation. In fact, we've done research at the conference board on that link as well, in collaboration with a few organizations, including Brand Logic. And the links are fairly strong. Sustainability plays a strong role in enhancing corporate brand and reputation. That's generally the findings of some of these studies. I don't know if there's something specifically we should be looking at in the 2015 version, but I look forward to looking at it.
Just a couple more questions. Are the sustainable products profitable initially or within 2 to 3 years? Does that affect companies' decisions to develop these products given the market's short-termism?
That's an interesting point, and I think it really asks for further research. We didn't specifically look at profitability of these products and services. Much of that really comes down to what companies are reporting, and in many cases, as we know, it's very few companies that are even reporting revenues associated with these products. The next step, of course, is reporting the profitability of these portfolios and products themselves. So I think that really is the next step, if you wish, in research.
Right. As I said earlier, I am inferring, I will not attribute this to Thomas, profitability based on a comparison of growth in revenues, R&D, what we've been told by companies, and where there is evidence of that on a very small smattering basis. So again, the data points align, but I would not say they are robust enough to do a full analysis of profitability at this point.
Right.
The next question, did you look at any B corporations? Do you think the lack of pressure from quarterly reporting leads to enhanced sustainability product innovation, better ROI on sustainable products?
Sorry,
There are no
go ahead, John.
there are no B corporations in the Global 100, so we didn't look at them.
Right, just to emphasize that point, the research universe was strictly bounded by the S&P Global 100. There are examples of companies outside of the Global 100, certainly, that are tracking these revenues, but our research was bounded by that index.
And it looks like our last question, why is energy a strong area for sustainable products and services?
Well, it's a crucial area for a number of reasons. Companies are so dependent on energy. Everything we do is dependent on energy. The price fluctuations of energy make it hard to predict and hedge against future energy needs. It's also a finite source at this point. Our main source of energy is non-renewable, and it's a large contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. So those are some of the areas why energy is a significant area of focus for companies. There are a few other reasons, but there's beyond energy. There's also a tremendous focus on water and water scarcity and the need to come up with water technologies as well. So I wouldn't say energy is the single largest focus, but it's certainly an important focus because of some of those reasons I mentioned, the tremendous dependence on it and also its finite nature, or the finite nature of where we're getting most of our energy from, and the need for technologies to change how we get our energy and where we get it from.
It looks like we have one more question. Do you think B Lab's efforts through G, IRRC, and B Analytics will provide valuable insight to the standardization we are seeking in sustainable portfolios?
I can't speak much to that, unfortunately. If there's some work being done on standardizing these types of methodologies and revenues, from these types of portfolios, and that can certainly be great input.
Oh, I didn't see your email. I'm sorry. I apologize. It's really hard to look at your email messages and keep up with that. Yeah, I know, but if I move from one to the other, it switches the screen off. It's really not. Okay, I apologize. I didn't see it. So going forward, do you have texting on your phone? Do you have texting on your phone? Okay, so maybe for the next conference call, we can do texting because I can look at my phone while I'm doing that. It's really hard to move from. I'm sorry, I didn't see your question, your comment. No, it's coming up in a different place. I didn't. Okay, now I can see it. Okay, I can see it in the chat now. Now I'm clicking on the chat. I can see it in the chat, and I just didn't have the chat function open and I couldn't see it. So I'm sorry. I guess my internet just hiccuped. I did that the other day. I've never had internet problems before. We had storms the other day and my internet kicked out. So thank God we were at the end of it. Oh, would have died. Anyway, to the next, the next one, maybe we can just, because I can watch it's easy for me to watch my email and messages on my phone because it's separate from the computer. So maybe like if something comes up next time, like just text me or something. I know. Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. My bad. So, oh my God. I'm like, those are the most questions we've ever had, right? Okay. And I can see Thomas, isn't it? Okay. Oh, I can't even reply to that. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, I will,